morning, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to our webinar today, Consumer and Food Trends, Key Insight on How the Pandemic Has Changed the Future of Food. We're absolutely delighted today to be doing this session in collaboration with our partners at CGA and at Sysco Speciality Food. In this session, we'll be taking a look at how the global crisis has impacted the attitudes of consumers and how the rise of conscious consumption, developing technology, and altered behaviours are affecting food trends in the hospitality industry. So it should be an absolutely fantastic session. I'd like to introduce to you our brilliant speakers who will be covering this session with you today. Carl Chessel, Business Unit Director for Hospitality Operators and Food at EMEA. Ian Nottage, Head of Food Development at Sysco Speciality Foods. Peter Innes, Sector Marketing Manager for Hospitality at Brakes, and Mark Irish, Head of Food Development for Brakes. The session starts with some short introductions from each of them, and then Carl will take you through a brilliant presentation, followed by a bit of a panel group discussion around what these trends mean for food operators in our industry. We recorded the session in advance due to social distancing. It is slightly longer than the 45 minutes advertised, so we do hope that you can stay on till the end because it really is a fantastic discussion. But if you can't, don't worry, because we will be putting the recording on YouTube and our event site, so you'll be able to download it from there. But if you can stay on, please do. There'll be a live Q&A at the end, so you'll have your chance to ask any questions that you've got. But also we'll be taking you through the other webinars that we've got as part of the event programme, and there's also a Q&R code on there which you can download and take away today's presentation there and then. But without further ado, we'll start the session.
Hi, my name is Peter. I'm a Customer Marketing and Insights Manager here at Brakes. Hopefully today we're going to go through some really great insight that we can share with you, and we'll give you some real food for thought as we go forward. A great group of panelists with us today, and we hope you really enjoy the session.
Hi, my name is Carl Chessel. I'm a director at CGA, working day to day with some of the major pub, bar and restaurant groups, and also with food service companies. I'm going to share a deck today on some of our market insights and consumer trends as we look forward.
I'm Ian Nottage. I'm the Head of Food Development at Sysco Speciality Group, which incorporates Fresh Fare, Wild Harvest, KFF, Roots of Oxford, Fresh Directs, Fresh Kitchen, and M&J Seafoods. Predominantly working with our customer base to bring products to life and highlight some of what's in season, as well as trying to form a bridge between some of our growers and producers and the chefs, the end users, because we really believe that when chefs get to meet the growers and the fishermen and the farmers, they have a much better appreciation and understanding of the product, and hopefully we can get them in the kitchen and show them how best to use it.
My name is Mark Irish, Head of Food Development at Brakes. I work very closely with our central marketing teams, merchandising and category teams, as well as the development chefs, mainly responsible for things like recipe and menu development, but also involved in food events, exhibitions and webinars. Part of my remit is also to manage the two flagship innovation centres that we have, one in Covent Garden and one in Reading. And I'm also part of the wider team involved with signing off on new product ranges for our business. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to present on how the pandemic is changing the future of food service. At CGA, we're a data and insight company focused on hospitality. So it's going to be really through a data lens, looking at where the market is now in terms of reopenings, how the shape of the market has changed over the last 12 months, looking at how the sector is adapting operationally to some of the challenges and opportunities, what consumers are looking for now, and as we move forward, hopefully as soon as possible into a post-pandemic environment, and also some of the evolving food trends that we're seeing. So starting with where the market is now, it's a pretty devastating fact that hospitality has been hugely affected by the pandemic. It's been disproportionately affected relative to other sectors. Within our UK hospitality quarterly tracker that we build for UK hospitality, you can see that on an annualised basis, over 80 billion has been wiped off hospitality's revenues. So this is pubs, bars, restaurants, hotels, events and contract catering. So just really demonstrates how disproportionately effective the sector has been from a revenue perspective. We've also seen the same, sadly, from a venue perspective. We've seen a net decline of over 9,000 licensed premises over the 14 months from the end of March through to the end of May. Just to put that into context, in 2019, we lost around 2,000 licensed premises. So again, a really devastating number. What's driven that is more closures than normal, but actually really it's been a lack of openings through the period of the pandemic. We're hopefully through the worst though. Some business leader research that we did in May. This is very senior business leaders in our sector, pub, bar, restaurant group, very much at C-suite level. 1 in 10 of them are telling us there'll be some sites that will still permanently close, but many of the closures have already happened. And those that are looking to close sites, it's relatively small proportions of their estates. On the good side, we are hopefully going to see some new openings, and we're already seeing that to an extent as well. I mentioned through the pandemic that the net numbers decline have been driven by a lack of openings in part. But as you can see here, 58% of business leaders are planning to open sites within the next 12 months. It's biased slightly towards the larger operators. And those that are looking to open new sites, on average, it's around 4 sites. So we will see new openings that I think are going to be really important to the recovery of the sector. We're also likely to see some acquisitions and brand new entrants to the sector. And these are really important. These are fresh ideas, fresh money coming into the sector. And that business leader research that we did, around 1/3 of business leaders are expecting higher entrants over the next 12 months than we're seeing in 2019. So some positives there. When we look at the reopening, as it's happened in the various phases this year, what we saw through April, obviously slightly different restrictions by country, but in England from the 12th, people were able to open for outdoor dining. And by the end of April, around 1/3 of licensed premises had reopened from a Market Recovery Monitor report. Food pubs found it easier to reopen. They often had beer gardens or car parks that they could designate to outdoor dining. It was much harder for casual dining and for restaurants who didn't necessarily have that outdoor space. And many of them waited until the May the 17th date to allow indoor dining. As you can see at this point, by the end of May, most pub, bar and restaurant segments are around 90% open. But it's really the late night and sports and social that are lagging behind. And we're at a point now where, taking account even of those that are permanently closed, we still have around 1 in 4 venues still to open. I think this is a really important message that's consistently going to government as well, to demonstrate that the sector is far from out of the woods and is going to need ongoing support as we move through the recovery. We still have some way to go. That said, given the amount of closures and the sheer scale of the lost revenue, you'd expect the sector to be pretty pessimistic, but actually that's not what we're seeing. So again, we do this quarterly. So this is, the latest data is based on May. Just to understand this slide, you can see that optimism was pretty high pre the EU referendum. It then crashed. The sector as a whole wanted to remain. And we saw a kind of ebb and flow really, with a gap between optimism in own market and optimism general market, I should say, and optimism in own business. People much more optimistic about the prospects for their own business than they were for the market as a whole. It seems a long time ago, but when I was presenting this back in February 20, optimism had started to grow when we had a resolution on Brexit. 2020, it was obviously on the floor, but we've now started to see optimism pick up quite substantially. And it's now at the highest it's been for nearly 6 years. This is operators taking a 12-month lens. It was really encouraging to see that. I think suggests that hopefully we've been through the worst and people can start to plan forward with optimism now. Many operators are ahead of expectations. So 58%, clearly expectations have been reined in, but 58% ahead of expectations, many in line with expectations. So operators have been pleased with how customers return to the market and with how they've been trading. This is our Coffer CJ business tracker. About 60 leading operators share with us on a weekly basis their performance, and on a monthly basis we put out a press release. And as you can see, they're like for like still down around 15% for May, but bearing in mind the restrictions still in place, I think that's a substantial result for the sector. The thing that also is worth stressing though, that all outlets total sales are still down over 26%, bearing in mind, as I said earlier, many venues are still to reopen. You can also see in May that actually restaurants performed pretty well relative to 2019, which is now our new benchmark rather than year on year. and certainly closer to that 2019 performance than pubs. So again, some encouraging signs, but still some way to go. And I think this is really important, actually, that many of those venues are seeing those revenues climb. They're seeing that they're performing ahead of expectations, but they're not necessarily making a profit. And that's going to take some time. So again, really banging the drum for further support. The extension of the debt enforcement moratorium was very welcome, but I think more support is clearly needed to ensure that many venues can reopen and survive and flourish in the post-pandemic environment. Moving on to how the sector is adapting operationally, both to challenges and opportunities. There's a number of changes that have become evident. And the first thing I wanted to talk about was the people challenge. And this is very much in all the conversations I'm having with operators at the moment is a big concern. Around half the workforce have returned to work. This research was around sort of mid-May. Around 1 in 6 have left the job, so that's created a gap. And many are still furloughed or on flexi furlough. And the furlough scheme has been incredibly good in terms of protecting jobs, but there is a concern amongst operators about how many people are going to come back to their jobs, how many people have found second jobs. So that people challenge is really at the fore now. As you can see here, whilst people expected staff challenges, they perhaps didn't expect the staff shortages to be quite on the scale that they are. So the kind of red bars there at 51%. For both staff shortages and reduced pool of potential employees to recruit from. That's suggesting that 51% have had those impacted more significantly by staff shortages and that reduced pool than they expected to be. So that people challenge was known, but I say it's been bigger than perhaps people anticipated. And certainly by the end of 2021, you can see almost every operator expects to have a shortage of people, both front of house and back of house. So this is a real operational challenge to operators. One of the things that operators have really embraced, and the sector, both consumers and operators have embraced, is the use of technology. The whole customer journey has changed somewhat. So people have had to plan their journeys more. They've had to pre-book. And you can see there are nearly half of consumers planning their visits to hospitality venues in more detail than they did before the pandemic. And we expect some of this use of tech, pre-planning, to stay, at least for the short to medium term. Many more people have been ordering through table service, ordering digitally through the phone, using order and pay in a digital fashion as well. And generally satisfaction levels, as you can see on the right, have been high. There have been some demographic trends within there, in that younger people have adopted this technology quicker, but actually satisfaction levels have been high. So when people have used the tech, even when operators have used the tech, operators themselves have recognised that historically they've maybe been slow to adapt some of this technology or found that it's been difficult to adapt. They've done it, they've had to do it, and actually they found that it's benefited their business in many cases, and certainly consumers have found high levels of satisfaction. So certainly for food-led occasions moving forward, we expect much of this new digital customer journey to be part and parcel of how people engage with operators of menu choice and payment. One of the other key trends that we've seen is people staying more locally. Obviously, we're encouraged to stay local through the pandemic, and people have been visiting city centres much less frequently than they did pre-pandemic. So some of this is through choice and the types of occasions that people have come back to the sector for, which have generally been more low tempo. The big night out, obviously, Freedom Day being pushed back has meant that it's been much harder for late night and for nightclubs. So those type of occasions aren't happening at the moment. People are staying more local. And people are also working from home a lot more, as you'd expect. 70% of those able to work from home moving forward predict that they're going to work from home in some capacity moving forward. It's obviously going to depend on the employer, on the job role, on the employee, but undoubtedly there's going to be more of that. And therefore that's having a real impact on some suburban venues, on the type of consumer going into those suburban venues, on the day parts that people are going to those venues. And many are looking at the menus, they're looking at their drinks range to capitalise on what sometimes is an opportunity for those suburban venues. The next trend I want to talk about is omnichannel. It's a growing trend that's been embraced by operators for a while. So we've seen a number of Italian brands like Zizzi's and Pizza Express in grocery, leveraging the value they have in their brand in other environments. The other key channel that we've seen grow is delivery. So we track this within our Coffer CGA business tracker as a proportion of sales. And you can see that pre-pandemic is around 5-6%. When we came out of the lockdown last year in July, that spiked to 13%. So not everyone was back eating and drinking out, and therefore delivery was still a really, really important channel. What I find really interesting about this slide is that through August with the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, in September when there was a fairly strong recovery, that this delivery channel was still seen as really, really important, and sales were still in double digits. And that's kind of coming through in our consumer research as well. Consumers are telling us that they did order more than usual. Many ordered for the first time, and you can see the stats there that people are expecting on the whole to continue their frequency of ordering to delivery from restaurants and from takeaways, but also looking to pubs and bars. And some of that is drink led. So I think people at Alchemist have done drink kits that you can take at home, and I've enjoyed those myself. People have obviously ordered things like growlers and taken them home from pubs as well, but also pub operators, people like Punch, looking at dark brands. Mitchells and Butlers have announced they've got the logistical footprint of venues around the country and are therefore looking to operate more in an omnichannel model as they move forward. One of the big successes through the pandemic has been food kits in various forms, either food kits where people have had to cook themselves, follow a tutorial, or sort of ready to cook meals. People like Coat have been really successful in doing that. And I think what's encouraging is that people have been prepared to spend on that. People have missed the experiences they've had in hospitality and therefore looking to create them at home, but certainly not on the cheap. They're looking for the quality. And we're now tracking hospitality at home as a revenue stream in more detail. So you can see here, looking at 2021 versus 2019 in May, that sales up 273%. Clearly, we're not going to see those sort of figures for the long term. In fact, they've dropped slightly from April. As more and more venues open, those figures are likely to drop. But it's certainly here as an important revenue channel, and certainly operationally, people are looking at how they can maximise that channel, how they can make it work within their venues so they haven't got delivery drivers obstructing consumers, but it's definitely something that's here to stay. Moving on to what consumers are looking for, there's quite a lot of things they're looking at, and obviously I'll touch on that. I think the most important thing to highlight though is that they want to come back to the sector, and they are coming back to the sector. We've seen that in the sales. Over a third of consumers are more optimistic than they were 6 months ago and 12 months ago. So there is that level of optimism. What's good for me to see as obviously someone that's really interested in the sector is that over a quarter plan to go out more than they did pre-COVID. Nearly a quarter planning to spend more than they did pre-COVID. So it's definitely been a sector that's been missed. People have missed the opportunity to have great experiences with family, with friends. And you can see that 2/3 of COVID's, one of the impacts has been that they want to live more in the moment. And hospitality drives that with great experiences. And we are social beings at the end of the day. And being able to go to a venue, meet friends, meet new people, meet family, is what people have really, really missed through the various lockdowns. And many people, as you can see, 54% planning to go out more than normal at every opportunity once we're back to normal. And prioritising spend on eating and drinking out as well. So yes, holidays, the staycation obviously is definitely going to be here for this year, but that will also drive sales in our hospitality venues. But people looking to prioritise their spend on eating and drinking out over buying more clothes and indeed other stuff. The return to the market has actually been quicker than it was last year. So when we came out of the lockdown in July, there was a level of caution amongst consumers. What we saw this time when we asked consumers in April is that 3/4 are planning to come back to the sector in April itself. As we came through to May and June, though, it was kind of capped. And by the end of June, people were telling us that there's a portion, 19%, that are still going to be reluctant to come out. Now, when you dig behind this, it's very much linked to cases. As the vaccine rollout is being ramped up, there was definitely a view that once we got to, say, 75% of the population being vaccinated, that people would go out. And clearly we're getting to those sort of levels. Delta variant has been clearly an issue to monitor. But the good thing is, I suppose, is that the 81% are the most engaged with the sector. They're the people that tend to go out most and spend most. But there is still a proportion of the population that are cautious, which, let's face it, is understandable given we're coming out of a global pandemic. In terms of the factors that are driving people's decisions of where to go, cleanliness is much more important than it was pre-COVID. Feeling safe is. But also things like quality has come through. I mean, quality has always been an important driver. of choice for consumers, but it's become more important. People perhaps haven't been able to cook as well at home. I speak for myself there. Certainly haven't been able to have some of the quality of drinks, whether it be cocktails or long alcoholic drinks. And so quality has become a really important driver, and is third behind that safety and cleanliness. Some of the things that have decreased in importance are things like busy venues, live music, some of the more ambient factors. But I've put for now in the headline for those that are eagle-eyed, because I do think some of this is short term. Clearly, cleanliness and feeling safe is going to be an important driver moving forward. But we saw even through 2020 that as people came back to the market more and more, they really wanted to have these experiences, and they missed those experiences. So I think that's something that we're going to have to watch. People will become more fussy as we come back to the market and as things get back to normal. The other notable change amongst consumers is that health has grown as a trend. People have taken their health much more seriously as a result of COVID. Health is not a new trend. You can see 72% of consumers trying to lead a healthy lifestyle, but it has grown on a 12-month basis. So health is a much more important driver, where people go, and obviously the menu items that they're going to choose. Treating workers fairly is still number one, but actually in terms of other choices that people are looking to, ethical and sustainable considerations have really grown. And investing in community is notable on the right there, growing in 10 percentage points. So people have, as I said earlier, been encouraged to stay local, but they're also more invested in the local communities and want their brands to reflect their values. So, as I say, ethical, sustainable credentials are really, really important, whether you're an operator or whether you're a supplier to the sector. And the final one I touched on this is that element of localism. Some of it has been about, yes, staying local and perhaps a boom in suburban locations. We're seeing that through our sales data, but also people want to be seen to support their local venues. It's not always about independence, but people do want to support people within their local community and local venues. And I think that's going to be a really important trend that again, I think is going to be here to stay. The final section then on evolving food trends. We've conducted some food trend insights over the last few weeks. We last did it pre-pandemic in around 2 years ago, so it's really interesting for us to compare some of these stats. Just to start with though, being a foodie is more popular than ever. 42% of us consider ourselves a foodie, and that's up 5 percentage points. So we really care about the food. We might not be great chefs, but we care about the food we're eating. We care about the flavors, we care about where it's come from. We're interested in food as a nation. And that's interesting because many business leaders are telling us they like to reduce the items on their menus, nearly half. I think this will be really interesting to see. We don't have a crystal ball how long this trend continues, but certainly some people felt their menus had got too bloated. We definitely saw as the market reopened in April, albeit we have to flag that this is obviously outdoor trading only, so therefore people were obviously going to operate on reduced menus, maybe focus on food items that are more suitable to outdoor dining, like barbecue. But we could see in our EPOS data that the average number of dishes that operators were offering had fallen from 24 to 14. And certainly operators are saying that they're going to look carefully at their menu choices as they move forward and may not operate with menus on quite the scale they had done previously. In terms of the types of cuisines coming through, when we look at non-British, Italian remains the most popular, the big five being British, Italian, Chinese, Indian, American, British consumers. Most of these, though, are pretty well catered for. Supply meets the demand for most of those different cuisine types. What we saw a couple of years ago is that there were some emerging cuisines where they weren't necessarily catered for. These were the top five. They haven't really changed massively. So Burmese, Peruvian, Filipino. What is interesting for me is actually the growth on 2019. So people are even more interested in these cuisine types, and supply is still an issue. There aren't many brands in this space. We're seeing brands in Vietnamese like Pho. We've got Thai brands like Giggling Squid, Caribbean brands with people like Turtle Bay, but some of these are a bit uncatered for. And that's where I think the Omnichannel is going to play a role. So delivery is playing a role there. So street food and food halls that are popping up are catering for some of this demand. There's a food hall near where I am in Stockport, which has a great Cambodian street food option, for example. And they've also got the same option in Altrincham Food Market as well. But in terms of delivery, Indian is still number 1. And again, those top 5 percentages are different, but those key top 5 are there. But things like Mexican, Thai, Greek, also popular for delivery as well. I quite like this slide actually, because it's talking about the key driver for people's food choice. So what's the factor that encourages consumers to try new food trends in out of home? And number 1 is flavour. It proves that we're not fickle. Only 5% are encouraged by Instagrammability. So whilst the food has to look good, ultimately it has to taste good. And I think that's quite encouraging. Second, by the way, was recommendation from family and friends. People do listen to people they know and trust. But flavour, number 1, as I say, I think was really encouraging. Also up there was the fact that a food might be healthy. So that was also seen as a key driver for 30% of the population. So I didn't talk about Korean, I think it was number 9 in the emerging, but things like kimchi that seem to have those health benefits of fermentation. Other food types like I mentioned about Vietnamese, pho as a dish rather than as a brand, offering a very balanced meal. So this is really interesting and I think really, really important as a driver, as I talked about earlier. And it's really influencing what consumers are prepared to try as a new food trend. I talked about the importance of local, and that's coming through not just in supporting local, but also about provenance and people wanting to source food that is either grown in Britain, but also comes up. I haven't had time to touch on that, but they would ideally like to look for food that has local credentials and they understand where it's come from. And there are some operators doing this really, really well. There's one in London called Feng Sushi, who, as the name suggests, based around Asian food, but are actually working really hard with local suppliers, with farmers, to ensure they can get ingredients that are grown in and around London rather than having to import them from Asia. As you can see on the right there, ethically, considerations are also important in terms of where people are choosing to eat out, as I touched on earlier as well. The good thing is that sometimes there's a sense that this might cost more, so choosing ingredients that are sustainable, that are ethical, but actually people are prepared to pay more. I talked about the importance of quality. People are prepared to pay more for quality as well. And 40% of consumers are likely to pay more for a meal if the ingredients are sustainably sourced. So clearly, as an operator, as a supplier, it's going to be important to tap into that trend, but also to make sure that message is really clear to justify that potentially that cost if that necessarily is the case. So to summarise then, firstly, the hospitality sector has lost an awful lot of revenue, and it's stark when you see it in figures, 80 billion of revenue, also losing over 9,000 venues. But despite that, there is some optimism in the sector, and actually optimism we haven't seen for 6 years. Generally, the sector is full of optimism, it's full of ideas, it's full of entrepreneurs, and business leaders are expecting new openings, fresh investment this year. So I think we're taking that 12-month lens as we start on this, hopefully this final road to recovery. The sector should be in a good shape. Yes, supply has eased, but that should be good for those that are still trading. There are undoubted operational challenges. People is the biggest that we're seeing at the moment. There are challenges around supply chain as well. But operators supplying are adapting to this. They're also adapting to opportunities that are coming out of the pandemic. The trends like localism, that digital customer journey that's changed, the growth of Omnichannel offering new revenue streams. Consumers have really missed quality and experiences that hospitality have to offer. So whilst there will be a short-term focus on health and safety, ultimately, those quality of experiences are going to be really important as we move forward. And that's what hospitality delivers consistently. When we look at food choices, consumers are making decisions around health, sustainability, provenance. They're excited about trying new flavours, and flavour came out really clearly in the research, which I think is, as I say, I'm really encouraged by. Incorporating these factors though within menu, and particularly if we are looking at reduced menus, at least for the short term, I think is something that operators and suppliers are going to have to work hard with to get right. So thank you for listening. My contact details are on the slide, and I'll hand back to the rest of the panel.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. There's some really, really interesting stuff there. I think there's a lot of moment in time pieces that I don't think anyone can really predict much beyond probably the next 6 to 12 months, as I said, we're teeing up earlier.
Yeah, I think there's some things that we see as probably, I mean, things like the core drivers like health, quality, sustainability. I think they were always there. They're perhaps been magnified by the pandemic. They're here to stay. But I think things like how cities recover, I think is a really interesting one. You know, there's a few of those, like you say, none of us have an exact crystal ball. Couldn't have predicted what happened in the last 12 months, would we? Frankly.
No, absolutely. And I think it's something there around particular cuisine trends and how those are moving and shaping. Insofar as they've remained relatively static through 2019, and actually the core drivers have remained relatively static, probably comfortably for the last sort of 5 years. So that's great. Ian, having been through all of that, I'm sure, particularly when it comes to that sort of sustainability piece, when you spoke at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that sort of in touch with the growers piece, in touch with the producers piece. Just could you kind of sort of dig into that a little bit more in terms of what you're seeing from a customer point of view and how that sort of underpins some of the stuff Carl might have mentioned previously?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, Carl, fantastic presentation. And so much of what you said there resonated what we're actually seeing in our business as well. Yeah, and particularly around the sort of sustainability piece as well. And I think there's always been a drive towards UK produce, for example, and seasonality. I think that was growing beforehand. It sort of got accelerated with Brexit. And we're certainly seeing a lot more of that. I mean, people are looking at UK provenance on the menus as well, and the sustainable piece too. So, you know, really pleased from us as a business at Fresh Direct and Roots and Wild Harvest. Through the asparagus season, we've committed to using only British asparagus for the season rather than any import, which is a really strong message, I believe. And it was, you know, it's been well received by customers too. But yeah, sustainable is definitely on the agenda, I think.
Yeah, and Mark, I'm sure the deck has raised a number of sort of queries and questions with you. Is there anything sort of specific that you've looked at and you thought, actually, yeah, that's something that, you know, you're seeing or we're supporting and helping bringing to life?
Yeah, I mean, I scribbled down loads of notes. A fantastic, very powerful, compelling presentation, Carl. And I think my opening statement is clearly there's a huge amount of pressure and challenges within kitchens and food businesses at the moment. There always has been, but it seems to be sort of duplicated now. There's so much going on, so much for chefs and caterers to consider. So if I just pick out a few things, recruitment you mentioned, you know, how does the industry attract younger people into hospitality, keep them, develop them, and ultimately retain them? Reduce capacity in kitchens. We know, obviously, with social distancing, that you might have kitchen brigades that are 50% of where they were. So that has a knock-on effect in terms of, you mentioned, you know, reductions in menus. The consumer demand for eating out, I think, is greater than any of us expected. So, you know, whilst capacity is reduced slightly, I think everybody within hospitality is busy 24/7. And consumers want this better food experience, don't they? And they want better quality food. They're more informed now, and certainly over the last 12 months, more and more people have been doing more and more cooking at home. As you say, everybody's become a foodie or a chef. We mentioned sustainable food businesses and kitchens. So again, more pressure in terms of those establishments becoming ethically run and sustainable. That's something else that these guys have got to think about. Adapting to and adopting a takeout or cook at home option as well. A lot of pressure on establishments to keep that going. We know it is a big trend during lockdown, but more and more customers are happy to take great quality food from the local restaurant, pub, etc., and bring it home and cook it themselves. So again, something else that these guys have got to think about. Hygiene, cleanliness, we know with COVID measures and PPE how important that is. More cost and more pressure. And then new legislation, you know, Natasha's laws around the corner. So a hell of a lot for our customers to think about and consider. So really powerful. And I guess as a supplier, we need to obviously work with our customers very closely. and trying to alleviate some of that pressure and try and support them with really great food solutions and product solutions and insight and stuff that Pete shares with customers on a daily, weekly basis. So yeah, sorry, I've waffled on a lot there, but it's so much to take in. And as an ex-chef working in the industry, I do feel for the guys at the moment out there.
Thanks, Mark. And from my point of view, a couple of sort of questions I've jotted down, Carl. And one of them was kind of leaning into that question around city centre recovery. I think that for a number of operators, I think particularly the capital it's a bit disappointing to see those numbers by comparison to some of the more outlying sort of cities. Manchester doing well, Liverpool doing well, even sort of Glasgow. I think some of the numbers I've seen. Is there any evidence, because I know you guys have sort of visibility of global data, is there evidence of other sort of cosmopolitan tourist centres having that same sort of stinted recovery to the rest of the country? So my immediate thoughts go to some of the European capitals, Paris, etc., where that tourism spend, that tourism footfall is really, really impacted. And should operators, does that lead even more into operators kind of looking at local or national consumers, but kind of their own consumer, that sort of staycation idea, whether that's London, New York, Paris or Milan, it doesn't really matter, but should they be focusing on homegrown consumer as opposed to a tourist consumer?
Yeah, a good question and a lot in there. I think the short answer is yes, we are seeing the same global trend. We did some global research across 25 markets, and that's definitely coming through. You look at London, it's opened certainly slower than some of those key cities that you highlighted. I think it's worth flagging that we're seeing the key cities do quite well. So like you say, your Manchester's, Leeds, Liverpool, Birmingham, but it's not quite the same for some of the secondary towns and cities. But yeah, London has been disproportionately affected. Obviously, the Square Mile, Canary Wharf, full of workers, tourists, as you say, are slim on the ground, obviously. And then you've got things like events, which often gets forgotten. The reason that we often go to London. So certainly in drink-led venues, they've been much slower to open in London. Food-led venues have opened reasonably well, and the London suburbs are doing okay. But yeah, if you're right in the centre of London, it's clearly going to be a challenge. And there's a lot of thinking, I think, for London, but actually also for other cities about how they invent themselves or reinvent themselves moving forward. And I think that point of crystal ball, that's the difficult one, isn't it? People will go back to London ultimately. It's our capital. It's a great cultural city. We will get tourists back there. It's how long that takes. I think that's going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the other questions that I found really, really interesting, given the what I find is a nuanced difference in the modern space between a pub and a restaurant, is that while I believe the occasional nuance is quite slight, there seemed to be a disproportionate restaurant resilience in some of that CGA COFA data. Is that sort of resilience evident because restaurants were quicker on the uptake with that sort of multi-channel, that omni-channel offering, whether it was takeout, whether it was being able to offer something, as you say, your cook-at-home kits, which I think were amazing. I similarly used a few during the height of lockdown, and some of them were brilliant. But I think those were very much restaurant offers, and actually pubs were a little bit slower on the uptake of those. Is that restaurant resilience, do you think, indicative of the fact that there is a slight difference between those two sectors?
I think there's definitely some of that. Yeah, undoubtedly, like you say, restaurants, it's perhaps been easier for them to embrace new channels, but they've done it brilliantly, and some great examples out there. I think it's also where the May slide that I shared was obviously when a lot of restaurants reopened. So therefore, I think that certainly gave a short-term boost to restaurants in particular. They've really had different challenges. So pubs have generally been freehold, so they've not had the challenge of rents that restaurants have had. As I said, it's been easier for pubs to open for outdoor dining because they've got the outdoor space. So there've been nuanced challenges for each. It's clearly not been easy for anyone. But I do think also that the way people have had to come back to the market, it's been mainly food-led. So the kind of vertical drinking at the bar obviously can't happen at the moment. So therefore, I think that lends itself to restaurants recovering more quickly, as well as exactly what you said, that omnichannel revenue stream as well. But I think hopefully as the market settles down, there'll be a whole range of occasions we'll be able to go night clubbing. I haven't done that for quite a while, particularly because of my age. But you know, that hopefully the whole market can kind of make that recovery, and consumers can make their own choice about the types of occasions that they go for. But yeah, so I think in short that it's definitely a good space for restaurants at the moment. They're doing phenomenally well, and that omnichannel is good. But I think there's some factors that are also driving that.
That's fantastic. Ian, if I could kind of reach out for you for some of your experience. So Carl spoke a little bit about that sort of health aspect of how the consumer is changing. And just I understand how close you work with some of our collective customers. Are you seeing sort of a move towards that sort of fresher is better, menus being more healthy? I don't want to say health food driven because that's entirely not what I mean, but that consciousness around actually, you know, many years ago, the perfect way to cook a steak was with a lot of butter, a lot of garlic, a lot of salt, a lot of pepper. That was brilliant. Do you see that sort of move to lightening the general menu at the higher end of the market?
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, loads of butter and loads of salt with a steak is still the best way to cook a steak. Yeah, definitely. I think what we're seeing is almost not the generic health thing anymore. Not just it's green, it's good. It's a lot more about functional health, I think. So things like gut health is really hot topic at the moment as well. So we're looking at a lot of pickles and ferments and things like that. And you know, whether it be sort of high antioxidant diets and stuff like that, and definitely a move towards fresh for sure. A lot more fresh produce on the menus. I mean, a lot of the guys, especially at the premium end and the higher end, it's still about indulgence. So not every single steak restaurant's going to go into low carb, low protein, whatever, but there is definitely a move towards it. And obviously the plant-based flexitarian thing is still marching on as well, whether that be for health reasons or whether it be for ethical reasons, but it's still not going away. We're still getting a lot of inquiries, and a lot of the workshops we do will always feature vegan or plant-based, depending on your standpoint. But yeah, I think people are getting smarter about health as well. Say it's more functional than just generic. We've got to put something green on the menu. We've got to have a big bowl salad, and to be fair, there are a lot more options out there now as well. I think it's a lot more easier for development chefs to get their hands on, whether it be interested in plant-based materials, whether it be fermented foods, stuff that we hadn't really seen 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So, and that's accelerated quite quickly.
Yeah, and similarly, if you look at that natural ferment like kimchi, which are have been in the market for a long time now, sort of coming into our range as well, just that naturally fermented, and then leaning into that sort of Asian trend you were talking about earlier, Carl. Sort of that balance of how those things all mix together is really, really. I think, Mark, kind of a question, I think, in terms of leaning into you. So Carl absolutely sort of spoke about that consumer consciousness of only 5% of customers want Instagrammability on their food, and everyone a few years ago was going, Instagram is everything, Instagram is everything. I 100% agree with Carl. I don't think the consumers are looking for that. But do you think when chefs are looking at menus and designing menus, that visual appeal where the operators are using Instagram almost as the new pictures on menu idea, do you think that there's kind of legs there? While it doesn't need to be Instagrammable for the consumer, the food still needs to look amazing so that you can actually get that message out there through that sort of digital channel?
Absolutely. I think there's a natural progression here, isn't there, with things like Instagram in particular, and you can't get away from it. I mean, when we could eat out, you know, with friends and families before lockdown and since, there's still people getting their phones out and taking pictures before they've even taken a mouthful of the food. So tends to be the younger generation, and I kind of get it, and that will grow, but we're all guilty of it. We all want to capture that experience. So I think for chefs, I think we've all taken pride in the food we put on the plate, so nothing's changed. You still want to make it look great, but ultimately I think Carl spoke about it, it's flavour, that's what you remember. That's what you take away. That's the experience that you take away that you want to go back to. So whilst Instagram and social media isn't going away and will probably grow, I don't think it puts pressure on chefs when they're building menus and dishes. You know, chefs want to create great food. They want it to look good, but it must taste good. Ultimately, flavours everything, and I back up everything Cole said about that today.
Yeah, superb. Thanks so much for that. And I think, well, I mean, we're doing a part of the hospitality stand at the virtual food event. If you want to go and have a look, is about that. How do you use social media? So that great looking plate of food is designed for the social media feed. That's your new advertising platform. That's your way of getting to your customer. It's not for your customer to then come and take the same picture, the same thing. I think one of the other questions I had potentially for Carl was just around the sort of tech and digital world. So I was sort of leaning into that same question around how people are using that. So there was a couple of things there in the presentation about how consumers use that digital ordering service, that sort of order from table. The number, obviously, customers hugely comfortable with it. There seemed to be a slight decline from April to May.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that was driven by just a number of consumers going out to restaurants where there was now table service? Or is that actually it's not a necessity anymore, therefore consumers aren't as dedicated to using it? If that's a clear question.
I think so. I think it's a clear question. Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think it's a subtle change, but I think as the market settled down, there is a question. I think that crystal ball point is probably tech is the biggest area. I think, at the end of the day, hospitality is a people business, and therefore, we all enjoy good service, and I think that'll be part of the experience. So I think there are some demographic splits. Some people preferring the table service. Some operators have found it really beneficial actually in driving additional sales. They're used to tech sometimes and table service rather than having people at the bar. So definitely think, as I said, that some of that is here to stay. Generally, tech tends to move in one direction. Generally, you adopt tech, you use it, you like it, and then you don't want to go backwards. But I think that's been a really interesting balance for hospitality to get it right. And I think it will very much depend on venue. So to your point about restaurants, we were on a webinar that a couple of the guys from Lounges were on, and they were talking how actually having people order from a table rather than go to the bar has really driven additional sales. People get 2/3 of the way through a cocktail and they don't want to go and stand at the bar to order the next one, and so driven sales. So I think it'll very much depend on each operator, who their consumers are. I definitely think, as I say, it's changed for good. It's to what extent I think it kind of dials back a little bit.
There's two takeaways there. That if you have to stand up and go order, you realise how many cocktails you've had. And I think my experience, and again, I would agree and concur, having a little bit of ad hoc sort of input is going out to venues now where they have fantastic outdoor spaces, but also lovely indoor spaces, finding that sort of hybrid of the technology and the personalised service, where indoors there's a waiter, it's really personable. Outdoors, it's a bigger space, slightly more control. Actually, that's a scan and order, and you can get your drink delivered or even your food delivered outdoors. The sort of difference between the sort of, I wouldn't call it formal, but let's call it more traditional service indoors, and that kind of hybrid, really casual, kind of easygoing service outdoors. So, no, I think that was fantastic. Mark, have you got any other questions sort of based around what we've discussed in the last sort of 20 minutes or so?
Sure, yes, I do. Actually, for Carl, one of the questions I've got is about the emerging cuisines. And I know you said this was 2019, but that hasn't changed. I just wondered what's driving that insight in terms of those emerging cuisines.
Sorry, driving that in?
The insight. So what's driving the habits, I guess? What are the things that are driving that insight to say these are the emerging global cuisines? Because I'll be honest with you, they were quite a surprise, some of those. I mean, it might be closer to than me. But, I mean, certainly people haven't been able to travel overseas much in the last 12 months. So it's just understanding, where you're getting information from.
Yeah, so we did a food insight survey a couple of weeks ago. So essentially, and we did a similar survey in 2019. So it's really just comparing the two. So, I mean, these emerging ones are a bit more niche. So it's not going to be easy for every operator to suddenly have a big Peruvian choice, clearly. I think what it does demonstrate, though, is that people are interested in these new flavors and perhaps more exotic. I mean, in terms of the underlying trends that are driving, as I said, there's things like, we touched on Korean a few times, haven't we? But you know, that appears high. The interest in the sort of more Mediterranean diet, the interest in Middle Eastern as well, also come up beyond. There's sort of a middle ground between those top 5, which are pretty well catered for, everyone knows what they are, and these really sort of more niche emerging ones, which I think just demonstrate there's a demand there. People want to try these different things. And the point I was trying to make is that supply is not meeting that demand at the moment. There's a lot of people that want to try these different international flavors and they just can't get it. And I think that's where Omnichannel can play a route, maybe street food can play a route. But in terms of some of the drivers, I think it's definitely a sense of adventure around food. People, as I say, are interested in trying new things. The other thing that came up in some of our research was, yes, people have missed traveling abroad. So people are wanting to kind of get back to some of those flavors that they've missed. But it also comes back to that foodie point, really. People want to try new things, want to try new flavors. And that's where I think it's just demonstrating really that there are some smaller emerging things that people would like to try. And we touched on some of the other drivers around health, talked about that. I think that's another point, but a lot of it is down to that sense of adventure around food and kind of desire for new flavors. A lot of those things are quite flavoursome. You know, and you also look at things like, Burmese curries or Sri Lankan curries. You know, there's a lot of flavours going on in those dishes as well, which I think
great. Thank you.
Just to add to that, it feels, and this is having spoken to and looked at some other sources of insight. It feels like there's this quest for authenticity within those cuisines. So while you're sort of relatively generic, moving into Southeast Asian cuisine is really popular as a generic term, it's kind of that then digging slightly deeper into that and understanding the various nuances within those cuisines. So I think for our general customer, so if I was running a pub, great to sort of do a burger, maybe introduce that flavor of Korea through something, to maybe just a simple kimchi salad with that, or maybe a topping of kimchi. But it could be, a really great fried chicken, so just a lightly battered chicken, slightly different sauce to kind of give that taste and that flavor within the general market, rather than kind of really diving in and putting a real shoulder behind it. Nuances to a Korean cuisine in a local pub, I think is one of the opening ones. But I think to add to that sort of growth of Pacific Rim cuisines that you're talking about, there's a real lifestyle choice about it as well. People look down south and you look at people running and surfing and doing all these things in Australia and New Zealand. And I think there is a quest for that sort of, I want to live my best life through that. And I think they all kind of lend quite heavily into that kind of, as you say, healthy, lighter cuisine styles, but particularly both of those from some of the stuff I've seen.
Yeah, I think that point around authenticity is a really important one, actually. If your average pub started trying to do too much, it just wouldn't work. And a lot of the great entrepreneurship comes from people that have come from that country or have that background and can cook with that passion. And as I mentioned about that Cambodian place near us, that I think they think, and they're probably right, that they're the only Cambodian restaurant within quite a considerable radius.
I do need a name and address for that one.
Yes, that's fine. Well, they've got a restaurant in a place called Marple, which is a suburb of Stockport, and then they've got a couple of sort of more street food things in the food halls. That's just a good example of where it's clearly a family who are passionate about that and are bringing that, and it's really popular. But if someone else tried to replicate it, it probably wouldn't work.
I think some of the challenges around that as well also is actually securing and sourcing the ingredients, because you're absolutely right. I think one of the things we've seen over many years really is a cry for authenticity. If it says it needs an ancho chili, it needs an ancho chili, not one you can go and get from Tesco. So, and I think I'm a massive fan of Peruvian cuisine, and I've been shouting it for a long time, but it's really tricky to get those truly authentic Peruvian ingredients, and it's very, very price restrictive as well. So, you know, if you go to Peru and you walk around the streets, you'll be picking up a loca from the streets for pennies, and, you know, oca de Peru and all of those really amazing ingredients and authentic, you know, different types of amarillo and different chilies. You put them on a plane and you get them to the UK, and apart from the environmental impact, you suddenly that thing you'd buy in a Peruvian market for 20p costs you £20. So I think that's one of the things that does restrict that sort of thing. Whereas you're right, with things like Italian cuisine, French cuisine, Indian cuisine, it's pretty mainstream now, and things like classic Indian ingredients like ginger and turmeric are pretty mainstream now. So I think we've probably got a way to go on some of those really more far-flung cuisines and a bit on, you know, more authentic. So that is a bit of a challenge, I think.
Yeah, and I think, Ian, my next question was going to be to you regarding that sort of authenticity. Is are you sort of, particularly in your world with Fresh Direct and fresh produce piece, are you seeing customers looking for those authentic ingredients but actually produced and grown in the UK? Is there something around that sort of, you know, a great Korean barbecue where we get this amazing gochujang sauce potentially as an ingredient, as an import, but actually the steak is really, it's all about British, it's all about provenance when it comes to the kind of core ingredient, and authenticity when it comes to the additional to the flavors, the spices, etc. Is that sort of something you're seeing?
Yeah, I think, we always, the phrase we use is source British when best, and if it's relevant as well. So yeah, absolutely, you're right. I mean, it's one of the things, actually, it was going to be a question for Carl. You mentioned a really great steak. One of the things that we've seen a lot of late, and I don't know, Carl, if this come up in the research, but is the premiumisation piece. You know, so of actually people expecting a better experience when they go out. So it might well be that you've got this gochujang mayo or whatever, but going with an incredible, you know, lobster, as opposed to people have upsold it from a king prawn, for example. And I think, I'm not sure exactly what's driving that. I think a lot of it is down to the fact that people have learned to cook at home over the last 12 months. They've invested a bit more in better quality ingredients. They may be shopping at the local farm shop, discovering local bred beef and pork and homegrown veggies, and almost driving the seasonality bit as well. But a lot of our customers now are raising the game or raising the bar. So I think when people come back, they've had time to think about how much they spend, and they're going to spend it, but they want to spend it wisely. And as you say, get that great experience, whether it's in the surroundings or, more importantly, on the plate, amazing flavors and authenticity, and yeah, premiumization, something I can't cook at home. So I don't know if that came out in your research.
Yeah, it did. I mean, I touched on it briefly on the quality point, but you're right. We often talk about premiumization. We see it in both drink and food, actually. So as you say, consumers are drive for quality. We've got a bit of polarization in the market at the moment, where a lot of people actually have more money in their pockets than they've had previously. They haven't been able to go abroad. There's some people with second jobs, you know, still getting furlough money, and then obviously there's some people who have been really, you know, disproportionately financially impacted the other direction. But yeah, there's definitely a sense that people want to come back to the sector, as I talked about, and they want quality of experience and as I said, quality of food, and yeah, they are prepared to pay for it, as long as there's a delicate equation between sort of value for money, but value is definitely not about price.
Exactly that, which is one of the notes putting there. Value for money is a driver, but everyone thinks it's a race to the bottom. And I think value for money is, I'll pay more, but I'll pay for it with a smile on my face. Exactly.
Yeah, and if you look at the brands that were doing well and that were sort of expanding pre-pandemic, it was the likes of Coates and Hawksmoor, and you know, they're not fine dining, but certainly premium end of casual dining.
I think Collection is a great example of that as well. So
exactly. Yeah, another great example. Yeah, and where we've lost venues is generally in that mainstream, where there's probably too much. There has been a lot of saturation in certain cuisine types, like Italian, where we've lost a lot of those venues, and it's now probably more rebalanced.
Absolutely, I think, you know, to the point, it's value for money by quality, not driven by price, which is actually something I think I got from LJ, Carl, from one of the conversations I had with her, which was a very clear, crisp piece of messaging around value for money, driven by quality, not by price. So it was really, really simple. Guys, I am really conscious we're having a great conversation, and I'm watching Fran, and she's going, we're going to have to edit this down into something we can use, and we still need to Q&A, and we've only got an hour, and I think as a group we could probably talk about this for hours. So I just almost from the room, and I think I'll go sort of Ian, Mark, Carl, and or maybe myself and Carl, if you could finish, just just almost a summary note, or just a sort of learning you've picked up from the session would be great, just so we can sort of close out with a sort of final statement almost from all of us. So Ian, if you could start that for me, please.
Yeah, fantastic session again, brilliant presentation, and it's literally, I had a list of things down here about trends that we're seeing, and as I was going through the presentation, it was tick, 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 tick. So there is a real resonance with from what I see in my role of what the consumer's looking for and expecting, and what the food development guys and the brand guys are looking to deliver. So there is definitely a synergy there, for sure. And I think, speaking to a lot of the food developers and sort of culinary directors that are out there, there is genuinely a real feeling of optimism, which is great. At Sysco Speciality, we've had a bit of a catchphrase, which is "come back stronger," and I think a lot of the operators that are up for it are definitely doing that. So personally, I'm feeling pretty positive about the next 12 months. Fingers crossed that we don't get another disaster, but famous last words. But there's definitely an appetite out there for raising the bar, delivering great food, and focusing on quality, I think.
Mark?
Ian, you've captured that superbly, Chef. I'll echo everything you've said. It's very, very interesting presentation. Not many surprises in there, which is comforting. There is optimism. The industry is strong. It's resilient. We've seen that through lockdown. We know we'll come through this. We'll adapt to the challenges around a number of things, particularly in kitchens. We as a supplier have got to stay close to our customers, listen to our customers, take the insight on board. Insight's brilliant, but you've got to turn it into something tangible. You've got to turn it into something that customers can use, whether that's ingredients, whether it's products, whether it's recipes, menu, end-to-end solutions. So we as a business have a responsibility to sort of bring all that together and create those sort of tangible solutions for our customers. But no, really, really great presentation. Pleased to be part of this, and look forward to the next one. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Carl, if I could just have your final thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think from my perspective, Mark and Ian have talked really well about it. I think certainly that optimism, and I think that given what the sector's been through, which I talked about the lost revenue, the lost venues, to have that level of optimism moving forward is really exciting. And I think it's genuine optimism, because we've seen it already. Consumers love the sector. They want to come back to the sector. I was really encouraged, I think we all were, by the fact that things like importance of flavour, quality was coming through. I was passionate about the sector, passionate about food. That's really exciting. And I just think, ultimately for me, I'm really excited about the role that hospitality has to play in our recovery. It's going to be really important to the economic recovery, huge employer, but also to our social recovery. We're social beings. To be able to go out and enjoy hospitality again is really exciting. And I think hospitality will have a strong recovery, assuming that the roadmap's stuck to and we have no more hiccups. I think hospitality is here to stay. It's been here for generations.
Absolutely. I think my big takeaway feels like eating out is the current experience. I think there's huge optimism. I think I share that from a consumer perspective, but as well as sort of an operator perspective, there's a huge optimism in consumers going out, and that we spoke about experience and experiential kind of entertainment. Actually going out is that experience currently. So it's just watching how that sort of, once it becomes normalized again, what will consumers be looking for? And I think that's the really interesting thing. And that sort of that hybrid use of digital and omnichannel, and how nimble what traditionally could be seen as quite a traditional industry, how nimble it's been in adopting new technologies, new ways of working, to really come through. And I think, Ian, to your point, you said it's come back better. I think absolutely the industry as a whole, when we look back at this in 5 years' time, potentially, you'll see this really, we've come back better as an industry for all sorts of reasons, which I think is hugely encouraging. So thanks very much, everybody, for your insight. Carl, thanks so much for your input into the session. It's been really, really helpful and insightful. And Ian and Mark, thanks for your chef view. Thanks for that sort of customer view over the top. And I think we'll sort of end there and sort of leave that for opening into questions on the live session.
Okay, so we've got a copy of today's presentation that you can download directly using the QR code now or from this short link. But if you haven't got your phone ready to be able to zap this code now and then don't worry about that. We will be making this available as part of the video when we upload it to our site later on today and onto YouTube as well. So don't fear if you haven't got your phone at the ready now. Also wanted to tell you about the rest of the fantastic webinars that we've got within the Summer Food Festival programme. So do join us if you can on Thursday, as I mentioned, for our follow-up session on Natasha's Law. If you missed the first one, again, don't worry, it's on our channel on YouTube, and it's also on the event site on breaks.com, so you can go and play it there. Again, there's some fantastic resources for you to download to help you prepare for Natasha's Law. Coming up next week, we've got a fantastic session from our wine merchants for Bendham, who will be running a masterclass on food and wine pairings. On the 8th of July, we've got the first of 2 social media sessions. This first one is really a great starter session if you're thinking about looking after your social media channels, if you've just been put on point for that, or if you want just a great refresher session to go through your social media strategy and just sort of sense check you're getting the most out of it. 13th of July, we've got Love British Food joining us to talk about all the benefits of having British food on your menu and great ideas for doing that. And then we've got our final session on the 15th of July. Again, this one is on social media. It's a part 2 session, and it will give you a really good insight into 5 free tools that you can use to really take your social media strategy to the next level. So again, really great session. All of the sessions that we've got have got resources to download and take away. So if you can join us, absolutely brilliant. And you can sign up from the Breaks event page on the Breaks website. So without further ado, we will go into the Q&A. So we've got some questions that have come through. The first one, welcome William to the session. Thank you so much for your question. It was around businesses that serve traditional foods. So William's asked, can businesses that serve traditional foods like a hot pot, for example, still grow? We've obviously talked a lot about sort of new emerging trends, but quite a few food establishments are really kind of based on those fantastic traditional dishes like a hot pot or a roast. Do they need to do anything really to differentiate themselves more to grow, or is there still space to grow within that sort of more traditional offering?
Fran, I'll take this one if you like. Certainly some of the insight that I've seen, consumers are actually looking to rediscover a lot of regional dishes. So that's the good news. I think in terms of upgrading or premiumizing dishes, yeah, certainly look at that, but make it as authentic as you possibly can. I think that's the key, because I think during lockdown, as we found out, people were cooking more and rediscovering those dishes that they eat in pubs and restaurants and cooking them at home. They want to go out and eat them, but they want, you know, the best quality hot pot they could possibly get, or with a twist. So yeah, don't shy away from that. It's important that we keep some of those dishes on menus. Absolutely.
Just like to add to what Mark has said, I think the move towards hot pot, and it started sort of that growth in sort of 2018 with people like Heidi Lau coming to the UK. Service heavy, but people are absolutely returning to that service environment and looking for that service that they were experiencing previously. So absolutely, I think it's, you know, it's still potentially something that could look at some decent growth, as it is quite a new and novel concept within the UK. So yeah, absolutely, authenticity, real sort of great traditional format and great service with good quality is everything that Carl has sort of underpinned with some of the research.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess again, we've all been looking for some comfort in lockdown as well. So returning to those kind of traditional dishes that we all know and love is really sort of taps into that, and is potentially another great way of putting British food on your menu actually too, which we know benefits people. So this question's probably one for you, Carl, if that's all right. Just a quick question around when your next trends update is likely to be published. Do you kind of have a view of that at the moment, just so we know when the next update's due?
Yeah, well, actually, the research that we did and shared, some of it, particularly the last section on the food insight, is actually very fresh. So we literally conducted it in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I took snippets from it to use in the deck. So that research is going to be available imminently, in essence. Typically, what we then do on a rolling basis is we survey customers, around 5,000 customers, 6 times a year. So we'll always have kind of new, fresh research coming on board. But where we really deep dive into food, it's normally once or twice a year. But we kind of paused through that pandemic because of everything that was going on. We focused our research on what consumers wanted moving forward and what they wanted out of venues, and we went back. But yeah, that sort of Food Insight 2021 research that I touched on is available now. I think obviously my contact details are on the end of the deck, so
yeah,
have a chat about it. I'd be glad to have a chat to them.
Perfect. Is there any more information available on emerging food trends and flavour profiles? Carl, is part of that, or is that kind of something coming down the tracks? Or
no, that'll be part of it. Obviously, I tend to talk too much anyway. Trying to condense everything into sort of 20-25 minutes was a challenge. But so yeah, I touched on a few things there. Yeah. Some of the drivers we talked about, like flavour, recommendation, health. But there's a lot more. I think it was Ian talked about flexitarian and veganism. I didn't have a chance to touch on that. Yeah. I just about mentioned British, but that's also important, as well as that localism trend. So yeah, there's a lot more depth to that research that's available that we can share with people.
No problem, thank you. Probably one for Pete and Mark, if that's okay. But how does Breaks use trend insight within Breaks to support customers? That quick question come through.
Well, I'll start that answer. I think Mark can finish it from a customer point of view. We use platforms like our virtual food event, but also when we do get back into having live and in-person food events, we share as much of that information as possible with our customers. There's a fair amount of information available on our website in terms of that customer interface, how we're growing, and we tend to communicate quite a lot with our sales team, our sales colleagues, and just getting that message out to the independent market, and then on a number of one-to-one sessions with our bigger customers. But as a general rule, we sort of feed that through. Carl and his team absolutely help inform that, along with other sources of information. And then I know Mark has mentioned previously how we use that internally, and I'll just allow Mark to sort of answer that one in terms of how we use that internally.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. So obviously, as a business, we take the insight we've seen and heard today, and use that as part of our MPD pipeline. It's important that we understand what's happening, what's emerging, so we can create and develop products, ingredients, and food solutions for our customers to help them. So I guess that's the next bit, but then ultimately sort of front end is how do we turn that into dishes and menu and concepts for our customers. So once again, it's taking those ingredients and products and creating dishes and ideas with customers that are bespoke to them. So I think Pete's covered the insight bit, sharing with customers. Then there's the development bit, and then there's the front end, customers.
Yeah, thanks, guys. One for Ian, I think, if that's all right, Ian. Have you seen a shift in mindset in what chefs and customers are asking you to source since lockdown is lifted and sites are reopening?
I guess if we take it on a produce point of view, it's always a tricky one, because if we look at fruit and veg particularly, but a lot of guys, I want to see anything that's new. There's not a lot of produce on the planet. Most it's been around for a couple of thousand years, but it might be new to the market, and I'll sort of revert back to what was said on the video about sometimes the ingredients that we want to source is tricky because it's not within everybody's budget and all sorts of things like that. But yeah, I think sort of some of the things that we've been focusing on over the last sort of few months is that sort of visual appeal, or that sort of something different. So things like baby sweet potatoes. So everyone's got into baby sweet potatoes. Sweet potato fries are everywhere. But we've sourced a product which is basically about a quarter the size of a sweet potato. It is actually a variety, but it's great because you can bake it, and then suddenly you've got a healthier sweet potato option on the menu, and it looks great. You serve 2 or 3 to a portion. So those sort of things, you know, little baby sweet white peppers, baby veggies getting quite popular again, but not necessarily the old turnips and carrots that we used to know, but things like baby courgette that you can, and baby cucumbers you can char, grill whole. So yeah, there's not a massive trend. I think we're seeing more of it also towards, again, British, UK seasonal, in well particularly, and to a degree in fish. But yeah, I think there is. It's not changed dramatically. There are little tweaks, but little tweaks that people go, I haven't seen that before.
Yeah, thanks, Ian.
So that answers the question.
Yeah, no, thank you. I guess just one probably to you and Mark. Are there any emerging food trends that you think chefs and customers should definitely kind of tap into, sort of be aware of, ones that sort of rise to the top for you guys?
I'll start, and I'll let Mark add some sense after.
Hopefully you'll cover all of them, and I won't have to speak.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one with trends. I think, you know, a lot of people sort of say, what's the next big trend? I think in this country, because we're so eclectic with our food offering and diversity of population, we don't get many big trends. I guess probably flexi, vegan is sort of bucking that a bit, but we get lots of little trends that sort of, you know, a few years ago, I mean, people saying, yeah, Thai is going to be massive, and Spanish and tapas is going to be massive. So I think they all have their day, and there are little brands and larger brands that are doing it really, really well. But I guess the call out one for me, trend wise, it is still probably health and flexi stroke vegan, depending on what phrase you want to use. I don't know what you think about, Mark, what you're seeing on your side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, vegan plant-based is probably an established trend now, but it's growing. We know that, and probably because people are looking for more of a flexitarian diet, we probably get that. And there's products, there's ingredients out there, and we're working with those and creating great ideas for our customers. I think on the back of that, there's a lot of chefs out there doing clever things with vegetables, putting them, you know, front and center on menus now, being very creative with vegetables. So vegetables becoming the hero. So again, it's kind of moving it away from meat in its entirety to a degree. Cooking with fire, I think that's been a big trend and continues to be, particularly with outdoor dining, and we're seeing that a lot. I mean, chefs love cooking with fire, but consumers love it as well. So quite a lot of innovation there, and I guess al fresco dining's here to stay, isn't it? A lot of outdoor space has been converted into, you know, fire pits, sophisticated barbecues, pizza ovens. So for me, there's a few additional ones there that you know, food businesses should be mindful of. Yeah.
And just if I can add to that, because Mark, I know you've done one of these webinars on waste as well, but it's that sort of nose to tail, root to stalk, the whole sort of concept of using everything, reducing waste, and really respecting the ingredient for all of its parts. I think is something that's evident through all different cuisines now as well, which is really positive.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think businesses want to be thrifty, don't they? They're looking to save money, and certainly food waste is going to help that. It's also going to help the planet. So, you know, we've done a webinar on food waste. It's very compelling once you start digging into that and understanding where that comes from. But yeah, again, it's an operational trend, but it's still something that chefs need to be mindful of, definitely.
Yeah. And people can watch that webinar back actually as part of this event series. So again, you can go onto breaks.com and catch that, or onto our YouTube channel. So it's definitely worth watching for all the reasons that sort of Mark and Pete have mentioned. Guys, I think that's all of the questions that have come through. So I guess without further ado, it's for me just to say a massive thanks again to everybody that's dialed in and kind of listened today and watched, and we hope you really enjoy it. Like I say, you can watch this back and share it with anyone that you think it's useful for via YouTube or our website. And huge thanks to Carl, Pete, Mark and Ian for all of your insight today and fantastic answers to these questions as well. So everyone have a great rest of the day, and you have a great week as well.
Thank
you.
Thanks
Cheers,
everybody.
guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.